Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and as always, I'm honored you're spending time with us. Thank you for that. Today's episode takes us back to a time when history wasn't written yet. It was unfolding. It's 1774. The American colonies are fuming over British rule. They're about to revolt, and they want their French-speaking neighbors to the north to join them. But Canada had other ideas. Even before the first shots rang out at Lexington and Concord, American revolutionaries were wooing the province of Quebec, sending letters, envoys, and yes, even invading armies. They promised liberty, self-rule, and a new nation built on rights and freedoms. But Canada said no, politely, persistently, and, as we'll hear from our guest today, Smithsonian Associate Ralph Nurnberger, they said it quite powerfully. Our guest today is Smithsonian Associate Ralph Nurnberger, the always engaging and razor-sharp historian. He brings this dramatic story to life in his latest presentation for Smithsonian Associates. You can find out more about his upcoming presentation at the Smithsonian Associates links in our show notes today. But we have Ralph today. From diplomatic letters penned by John Dickinson and John Jay to botched military campaigns led by Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold, Ralph Nurnberger takes us inside one of the most overlooked rivalries in early North American history. This episode is filled with fascinating twists. Did you know that Benjamin Franklin's diplomatic trip to Canada ended with nothing but a warm fur cap? Or that Vermont almost joined the British Empire instead of the U.S., or that Canadians may have rejected revolution not out of fear, but out of a budding sense of their own national identity. We'll talk about all of this and more with Ralph Nurnberger. So get comfortable. Maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is that you prefer. Stay tuned. You're about to hear how two nations, Canada and the United States, became neighbors, not siblings. Here now, with the full story, is our guest, Smithsonian Associate, Georgetown University historian and scholar of all things compelling, Ralph Nurnberger. Ralph Nurnberger, welcome to the program.
Paul, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm delighted to chat about U.S.-Canadian relations from 1774 to 1815 or 16.
Well, thank you for that. And set us up a little bit. What will you be telling our Smithsonian audience during your presentation? Especially, how might you use Zoom to engage us? We're all on Zoom these days, and so it's a great tool. It offers lots of options, and I'm sure you're going to be using many of those, but maybe walk us through a little bit of that just briefly.
Well, forgive me for going on a little bit too long, but I'm delighted to talk about this topic. It came up because Smithsonian Journeys was kind enough to invite me to speak on one of their trips to Canada last October.
Good. I'm aware of your work with Smithsonian Journeys, so good on you.
We started in Toronto and ended up in Boston, went through the locks, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and they had two speakers, which they usually do. One was a naturalist and the other was a historian, which was the role I played. And I gave 4 talks. The first dealt with the founding of Quebec as a French colony, beginning around 1500 and ending with the defeat of the French at the Plains of Abraham in 1759 and the taking over by Britain. The second talk dealt with U.S.-Canadian relations from 1759, when the British took over, until 1815 or 16. The last talk on Canada dealt with U.S.-Canada relations from 1816 until about 1945 at the end of World War II. Smithsonian Associates, for whom I have spoken for at least a dozen years. I began speaking for them when the programs were live, held in the Ripley Auditorium for Smithsonian, and then during the pandemic, they became virtual. And now mine are all virtual. They may shift to hybrid, where we may do it live and virtual at the same time. And the Smithsonian Journey folks were kind enough to tell the Smithsonian Associate folks that my talk on Canada was something they should consider, and that's where this talk came from. So it's a compilation of the first two of my Canadian-U.S. relations talks combined into one. This one will be totally on Zoom. I will have a PowerPoint. There'll be about 100 slides because I believe that it's important for people to see and to know what the maps are, where people are going, and what they may or may not have looked like, and what the various documents I will be referring to look like in first person in real time. So I certainly will do a Zoom talk that combines a lot of PowerPoint and some commentary.
Well, thank you for that. Absolutely. And for all of our audience, we will put links so that you will know more about Ralph Nurnberger, Smithsonian Journeys, Smithsonian Associates, all of the great things that you've done. And this particular presentation is a fascinating one, Professor Nurnberger, because I think we're all we live in close proximity to this wonderful country. We know much about it, but then there's much that we don't know, and that's where I fall. I had no idea, for example, about the various invitations, the invasions, all of this. You mentioned Quebec and all this work, done on behalf of our country, trying to get Quebec to become our 14th colony. What is it about this that we just easily forget or just aren't even aware of? I'm surprised myself being so, naive about it all, but so many are, I think.
Well, I think a simple analogy, and then I'll answer your question about the letter. Assume that the United States looks at Canada through an open window and sees on the other side people looking just like Americans. Most of them speaking English and figuring they should be like us, and they should. And this view goes all the way back to the 18th century. When Canadians look at the United States, they're not looking at an open glass, they're looking at a mirror, and they see themselves. And they see themselves quite different from America. And so the question that intrigued me when I started to do the research on this is, did the United States ever want Canada to be part of the United States? And it really goes back to an absolutely remarkable letter sent in 1774 entitled Letter to the Inhabitants of the Province of Quebec. It was sent by the first Continental Congress. Members of that Continental Congress included George Washington, Sam and John Adams. John Jay was a member. And they sent a letter to the people in Quebec, and they tried to entice Canadians. This is pre-American Revolution, so we are still the 13 colonies are still British colonies, as is Quebec and Canada. They wanted to outline what they envisaged an independent America would look like, and it's an absolutely remarkable document. It really is a prelude to the Declaration of Independence. Again, when I first started learning about the Declaration of Independence, I thought Thomas Jefferson went to his little room in Philadelphia and wrote the thing, and that's where it came from.
Right.
It was based upon a whole series of documents, the philosophical writings of Locke and Montesquieu and Hobbes, but even more recently, the letter that they sent to the inhabitants of Quebec. It outlined the best possible terms that they think, join us. We're going to have freedom of speech, freedom of religion. people should have the right to make their own laws and to enforce them. There should be trial by jury. Everyone should be guaranteed the writ of habeas corpus. There should be freedom of press and communications. And it was an outline of what eventually wound up in both the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. The letter was sent to the legislature in Quebec. They, in turn, sent a copy of this letter to various localities, little cities, states, and villages to determine, is this something we should consider? And unanimously, they came back with, no, we don't want this. We are perfectly happy being subjects of the British Crown. We're not going to get involved. And if there's a war, we certainly don't want to get involved. And so the answer was no. In response, not taking no for an answer, the Second Continental Congress sent a second letter, and they got the same answer. No, we don't want this. We don't want to join you. We believe that we, in turn, have the rights that were promised to us by the British in something called the 1774 Quebec Act, and we're perfectly content. Thank you. Leave us alone. Not to be dissuaded, they sent a third letter. This one drafted by John Jay, the future Supreme Court Justice, saying, look at what we can provide. And they came back and said, nope. Part of it was the Continental Congress also sent a letter to the British Parliament outlining what they thought about the Catholic religion, saying, you've got a lot of Catholics there. We really don't like Catholics. And that letter became public in Canada as well. And they sent that around saying, hey, look at these radical Protestants in the 13 colonies. We sure don't want to be part of that. Well, not to give up a good idea, Benjamin Franklin went up there with Carroll, Archbishop Carroll, who ultimately founded Georgetown University, and Samuel Chase, who eventually wound up being a U.S. Supreme Court justice. They went to Montreal and they said, let's just talk about it. You really want to join us. You think this is wonderful. This is such a great idea. Why don't you join us? And they said, no. But we'll talk with you. And the talks went on, and Franklin got colder and colder, so he bought a hat. And this is where the famous fur hat the beaver fur hat that he wore in Paris to show that he was really a future Davy Crockett came from, that he was a pioneer. But all he got out of it was, as far as I could tell, the hat, because they said no again. So these were 3 letters and a delegation, a high-level delegation, Carroll and his cousin, and Samuel Chase, and of course Benjamin Franklin. And ultimately, the French Canadians said, nope, not interested.
It really was a full court press. It was an intense effort. Franklin, 3 letters that really could be considered very persuasive about a form of government and a way of living that's been our own. I would think it could be very persuasive. What did it say about those times in terms of diplomacy and even Franklin's abilities to not persuade? He isn't effective.
Well, Franklin was probably the best diplomat that the United States produced then, if not ever. The case he was making fell on deaf ears, largely because the Canadians were fearful of extreme Protestants in the United States. They thought they might lose their Catholicism or have fewer rights because of it. They felt that their population was so much smaller than the 13 colonies that they would be a minor factor in the overall American that might develop. Ultimately, the 13 colonies becoming the 13 states. They did not want to be the 14th and one of the lesser popularized with a lesser population. And so they basically turned it down and said, sorry, we're not interested. But the United States, the 13 colonies did, okay, 3 letters, Benjamin Franklin, Archbishop Carroll, future Supreme Court Justice. War breaks out between the 13 colonies and Britain. in April of 1775. George Washington is now convinced, once he becomes the leader of the colonial army, if we just send some troops up there, they will realize how strong and wonderful we are. They will immediately turn on the British Army located in Quebec, in Montreal, and elsewhere in what they call the Canada, and they will turn. We don't even have to do very much. Just showing up, and the Canadians will gladly welcome us. Once he heard this, Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys decided, we're going to be the first up there, and we're going to turn the Canadians over. And they went up to Montreal, and essentially his forces were so ineffective that they were arrested, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. The bunch of farmers came out to join the British Army. Couple of shots were fired. Ethan Allen and his mountain boys immediately surrendered, and Ethan Allen was taken captive and sent to England, where he spent the next few years in British jails as a prisoner. Well, that wasn't very effective. So Washington then came up with another scheme. Let's send two armies, real armies, up to Canada, and that'll show them. The first was going to be led by was ultimately led by Richard Montgomery, who unfortunately perished in this, and Montgomery County, right outside of Washington, is named for him. He leaves from Albany, goes up the St. Lawrence River, mostly by boat, is able to gain control of Montreal, and continues on to Quebec to await the Second Army. The Second Army is going to come by land, led by Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold had gone to Washington in Boston and said, I can be a great military man. Of course, no one knew, because this is the First War. Let me lead a contingent of Americans up there. And they get about 1,100 people, 1,100 men to volunteer to go up. One of his associates in this effort was Aaron Burr, who was then a 19-year-old graduate of Princeton University. And when I think of this, I keep thinking there is a clause in the Constitution, the only element in the Constitution, the crime that is described in the Constitution is treason, and it was put in there because what Benedict Arnold did later on, and the first person tried under it was Aaron Burr. So we have these two future traitors marching up in a march called the Dead River Expedition, and that's perfectly named. They went up the Dead River in the winter with no maps, no real compasses, going through the woods of Maine with the snow falling. They went up with 1,100 men. By the time they got to Quebec, none of the cannons were still with them. Most of their guns were gone. They were freezing, they were starving, and only about 500 made it. 600 either deserted or died. So they arrived towards the end of December in terrible shape. Montgomery meets with Benedict Arnold, and they plan to attack Quebec. They wanted to wait a little while. These men are tired, they're frozen, they're starving, they don't have equipment, and so Benedict Arnold says, let's hold off. But there's a problem, and the problem is these soldiers only volunteered to serve in calendar year 1775. It's now December 30th. So if they don't attack tomorrow, they're all going home. So therefore, they decided to attack even though it was snowing. Well, it was worse than that. It was a blizzard, and it was a massive blizzard. Again, not being a military historian, I can only describe in brief, the British strategy was they're going to stay indoors during the blizzard and shoot anybody dumb enough to be on the streets. The American strategy was, let's go through the streets and shoot anybody in the windows. Well, the British had the better idea. They were warm, they were covered, and they shot. The Americans were shot. Montgomery is killed. Aaron Burr gathers up his body and brings it back, for which he's considered a hero. And the Americans are soundly defeated. But the weather conditions are so bad that they camp outside of Quebec, and basically for the next few months they freeze. When the weather finally gets better, they go home, and both Benedict Arnold and Aaron Burr are considered heroes because they made it back.
Yeah.
Not that they accomplished very much. And so our three invasions of Canada at the beginning of the American Revolution look like they were written by the Marx Brothers.
We're speaking today with Smithsonian Associate Historian and author Ralph Nurnberger as part of the Smithsonian Associates interview series on the Not Old Better Show. I'm Paul Vogelsang. So far, we've explored how early American leaders courted Canada with letters full of revolutionary ideals and military campaigns filled with, well, let's call it misplaced optimism. But even after the dust of the revolution began to settle, the story between the U.S. and Canada was far from over. In fact, the next chapter would bring war back to the border, this time with higher stakes, deeper divisions, and surprising consequences for both countries. Coming up, Ralph Nurnberger unpacks how the War of 1812 rekindled American hopes of annexing Canada, how Canadians stood firm, and how in many ways that period may have done more to define Canadian identity than American. Stay with us. Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone. Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not Old Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Ralph Nurnberger joining us now, going to be at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Just a fascinating amount of work you've done, Ralph Nurnberger. And this is just almost as I'm listening to you talk, I'm kind of laughing to myself. You and I are enthusiastic about this subject, but it almost borders on slapstick. The whole approach, the almost lack of real kind of military capability, and I wondered, as you were talking, were we just naive then? As colonists, did we not have our sense about us? Were we just too idealistic about this idea of expansion in Canada?
Our information was not very good.
Yeah.
We did not have an FBI or a CIA
Right.
in Canada to provide information. No polling was done in advance. And so the leaders of the 13 colonies, Washington included, had convinced themselves that this is going to be very, very easy. The Canadians will just welcome us with open arms, get rid of the British. We will help them fight the British, and we'll all be independent together. And they just thought this is a great idea. To give you an idea of the idea didn't go away. When the War of 1812, prior to the War of 1812, Thomas Jefferson wrote that gaining Canada to join us is merely a matter of marching. All we have to do is go up there and they will gladly welcome us. And so at the beginning of the War of 1812, the United States, at that time, Madison's government, put together 4 armies who are going to invade Canada at the same time. And we'll just convince those Canadians that they really want to join us. The first one left from Detroit, found out that the Canadians and the British had as their allies Indians. And the Indians said, if we capture you, we're going to scalp you. And so the Americans surrendered. No shot was formed, and the leader of that effort wound up being court-martialed. Another effort, the effort was made to try and cross the Niagara River. and we're going to cross the river, and we have these boats, and we're going to get to the other side, and the British, they're going to run away when they see the American army. But unfortunately, the oarsmen who were going to take the boats across defected, and they couldn't get the boats to go across the river.
Yeah,
I don't make this stuff up.
right. Right.
In fact, my students at Georgetown gave me a T-shirt. I should have worn it today instead of a regular shirt. I'm not making this up. So finally, they get people who can row them across, and this is also great military strategy. They are in open boats, and the British are on the other side on heights, shooting down on open boats.
Not a good plan.
Not good. Most of them didn't make it, and then they turned back. There were a couple of other attempts. They actually got into Canada, and they marched up to Canada, and they got to the Canadian capital at that time called York. Today, York is Toronto, and they burned down Toronto or York. The Canadians did not find great humor in this, and the British did not either. And by the way, if anyone goes to Toronto, either as a tourist or is there, I highly, highly recommend going to the site of Fort York in Toronto. It's a wonderful, wonderful museum, and you get a really good feel for the Battle of York. Well, they burned down the capital of Canada. Less than a year later, another city is burned down called Washington, D.C. And again, not many people realized that one of the reasons they wanted to burn down Washington was that the Americans had burned down the Canadian capital. So, again, it did not work. And Canada once again decided, nope, we're not joining you.
Well, let me ask you a little bit more about the War of 1812, because it's you refer to it, it's called at times the Second War for Independence. What did that independence mean to Canada, and was it a positive outcome for Canada? Did it harm Canada's esteem and confidence in themselves? It seemed to have been more folly than anything.
To the contrary, it really it is viewed by the Canadians as look what we did. We were able to defeat
Okay.
the Americans.
A positive.
They wound up getting heroes out of it.
Yeah.
An Anglican bishop in Toronto by the name of John Strachan wrote almost immediately after that this shows that we Canadians can stand up to the Americans, and yes, we had British troops helping us, but we were our militia was critical to winning this war. It's now called the militia myth. The Canadians certainly helped, but it was the British Army, particularly after Napoleon had been defeated in Europe, and they brought troops from Europe over to North America that made the difference in the war. The British and Canadians won virtually every land battle. The Americans won a lot of the sea battles, particularly on the Great Lakes. The only major battle that the British were able to win, to lose, that the Americans won, was the Battle of New Orleans. And of course, that ultimately made Andrew Jackson famous and ultimately president. That battle was fought, however, in January of 1815, and the war ended in Ghent on December of 1814. And for whatever reason, the internet wasn't working then. And the telephone line was down, and there was no communication from Ghent. And so the good folks in New Orleans in January of 1815 didn't know that the war was over. And this was an example of the British being particularly stupid in their military tactics. General Packenham, the British general, had fought against Napoleon. And in the Napoleonic Wars, both sides line up against each other and shoot each other. You get dressed in red so that if you're shot, people can't see the blood, but you're pretty much of an open target. The Americans figured, Andrew Jackson figured, we're going to dress like rocks and trees and stand behind those and shoot down anybody wearing red marching across an open field. And as a result, about 2,000 British were killed, and about 86, I believe, is the exact number of Americans who were killed at the Battle of New Orleans. So Americans claim we won the war because we won the last battle. And of course, the British and the Canadians say, yes, but the battle was fought after the peace treaty was signed, and all of the disagreements and all of the border disputes and everything that resulted from the war was already over. And so the Battle of New Orleans had no effect on the ultimate outcome of the war. So it's a fascinating.
It is. It is. Smithsonian Associate Ralph Nurnberger has been our guest today. This is just a fascinating subject, and I really want to encourage our audience to go join Ralph Nurnberger and learn more about the Canadians of the 18th, 19th centuries and their steadfast, fervent belief in their own nationalism. This is just we've had a great conversation, Ralph Nurnberger, and there's more as Smithsonian Associates coming up. It's just going to be wonderful. All of this information is part of our history, so much of what we need to understand between our two countries, and you've just done a great job today with us. We're looking forward to your presentation upcoming at Smithsonian Associates. We'll have links and more information to Ralph Nurnberger. But Ralph, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you at Smithsonian Associates coming up.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure and fun to spend some time with you. By the way, the talk for Smithsonian Associates will be on August 21. I think it's 6:45 in the evening then, and the links can be gotten through you or through Smithsonian Associates.
Yep. Very good. Well, Ralph Nurnberger, thank you for your time. We will talk to you again. Please come back.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
What a remarkable conversation with Smithsonian Associate Historian Ralph Nurnberger, who will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes for more details to help you uncover the forgotten chapters of our shared past with Canada and how early decisions, failed invasions, and heartfelt letters shaped two very different nations. From the idealism of the Continental Congress to the cold realities of war, Ralph Nurnberger helped us see how national identity isn't just declared, it's chosen, tested, and sometimes rejected. If today's episode sparked your curiosity, be sure to check out Smithsonian Associate Ralph Nurnberger's full presentation with Smithsonian Associates. Visit us at notold-better.com to listen to this show again and explore our complete catalog of previous episodes. You'll also find us all over social media, all of our stories, all of our conversations there. We're on Twitter at notoldbetter. We are on Instagram at notoldbetter too. This has been a production of NOBS Studios. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang. Be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you'll join us again next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast.